I want to read the bio. I want to read Dan's bio because it's so interesting before we get started. So Dan Turchin is the CEO and founder of People Rain, the leading AI platform for employee service automation. He serves on the board of Augur, the open source automated machine learning framework. Prior to People Rain, Dan was the CEO of AI Ops, Leader Insight Finder. Previously, he co-founded Astound, an AI-first enterprise platform for HR and IT, and was vice president of product at DevOps leader Big Panda, chief product officer at security analytics company Excel Ops, now Fortinet, and senior director of product strategy at ServiceNow. He also served as a founding board member at Romobile prior to its acquisition by Motorola. In 2000, Dan co-founded AeroPrise and served as CEO until it was acquired in 2010 by BMC Software. He's an active angel investor and startup advisor and has hosted over 100 episodes of AI in the Future of Work podcast. Dan's passionate about building great teams that build great products that solve hard problems that change lives. He's a big fan of Orwell, Dr. Seuss, youth soccer, adventure sports, and Tinker. Dan has a BS and BA degrees from Stanford University. And yeah, very impressive and very extensive background. And I hope it gives our audience some perspective on your presentation today. So thank you for being here.
Cassie, it's my pleasure. And Maxim, thank you for having me. And thanks to all of you for joining us, like Cassie said, on a Sunday morning. This is the topic I am most passionate about. It's my life's work. So I'm happy to get up on a Sunday morning and have a discussion like this. But I realize this might not have been the thing that you had planned to do at Sunday at 10 a.m. So I appreciate you making time. So like Cassie said, Dan Turchin, CEO of People Rain. People Rain is actually the 7th company I've either started or been involved in that's solving a similar problem. So applying the principles of AI and machine learning to improving the employee experience for large enterprises. And the reason this is a topic I'm so passionate about is because I firmly believe in the next 30 years, the fundamental nature of work will change more than it has in the previous 300. So we're going to talk today about what's changing, what are the patterns, and most importantly, what you can do about it, how you can make sure that you're, call it on the right side of innovation as some of these patterns emerge. And before I get into some of the data and some of the suggestions that I have for you about how to take advantage of the coming new world of work, I thought I'd share a few interesting statistics about what it is that is ahead of us that I think kind of frame the discussion we'll be having. By 2030, this is according to PricewaterhouseCoopers, AI will contribute about $16 trillion or 26% to global GDP. To put that in context, that's bigger than both the GDP of the United States and China combined today. So something pretty cataclysmic is afoot. The World Economic Forum goes on to say that by the year 2025, AI will eliminate 85 million jobs globally, which is a staggering number, but only until you consider that it's likely to create 97 million jobs. So just think about all the opportunity that AI is creating, and today's discussion is really about how you can take advantage of that. So our fearless leaders are out there in the public press talking about what they feel will be the enduring impact of AI technologies. Here's a popular one from Sundar Pichai, who said last year, the impact of AI on society will be more profound than fire or electricity. We've got Zuck, we've got Elon Musk. They're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum, trying to figure out if, like what Elon says, AI will have more impact than nukes. Zuck is a little bit more sanguine, but we're getting vocal opinions from our technology leaders every day, and it's really up to us to try to synthesize, what do we believe and what really what we can do about some of these changes. Now, we've got a small group, so I think in the interest of getting deeper into the content, I'm just going to ask one of these questions. I've got 3 questions, and I'm going to open a poll. But I would at least like to get a quick profile of who I'm speaking to. So I'm going to go ahead and cut over. You should be seeing this polling question. I'm going to activate it and present it. Which of the following best describes your role? Are you A, a student, B, a faculty member? Are you in industry or academia? Or D, something else? And the way you vote is go to pollev.com/my name, Dan Turchin, 744. You can vote there, or if you text Dan Turchin 744 via SMS to 22333, then you can enter either A, B, C, or D, the letter associated with your selection. Give a few of the others a chance to register votes. Given the nature of this event, I had imagined that it was mostly students that would be on the discussion. We'll give it another few minutes, or sorry, another few seconds, and I'll close out that poll. At least one person could figure out how to use the polling system. That's always a good sign. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and stop the poll, and then because it's a small group, I'll make sure we leave time for Q&A. So I can ask some of the other questions that I plan to use polls for. We can ask them toward the end. So some framing questions. So what is that future of work I've been talking about? What's the current state of AI? Where are we headed? What skills are required to take advantage of some of these trends and really future-proof your career? So a quick history of what I mean when I say being on the right side of innovation. Well, here's a variety of case studies that illustrate what it's meant in the past to be on the right side of innovation. All the way back to the 15th century, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, and as you may well be aware of, it disrupted the jobs of a lot of hand scribes that were handwriting books up to that point. But you know what? We're all kind of glad that the printing press was invented. Fast forward a few hundred years, the 18th century, the cotton gin really kicked off the first industrial revolution. And that meant that it was much more efficient to process, to turn raw cotton into thread to make clothes. And it really kicked off the process of industrialization that led to the next several hundred years of innovation. Again, I think we'd all agree that the invention of the cotton gin was positive for society. Along came the automobile, and there were a lot of drivers of horses, of horse-driven buggies that were very disappointed that Carl Benz and his associates invented a gas-powered engine, and it turned out, that they were right. And I think we all appreciate the fact that we have cars, which led to things like boats and planes and other forms of transportation. It was a bit later that we were able to make phone calls, and the world got a lot smaller. But gosh, the automation of phone calls put a lot of switchboard operators out of a job. And thankfully, they were able to reinvent themselves, because it turned out automation of phone calls created a bunch of jobs as well. And we now have a quite large telecom industry to thank, or that emerged out of the innovation that came in the 1970s. And then another good example is the Netscape browser. Certainly was a net creator of a lot of jobs in what we now call the web industry. But there was a time when there were no web developers, and there were no apps, and there were no devices to run those apps, and there were no operating systems. And you can only imagine how, while certain jobs related to the print press went away, thanks to the browser, a whole lot more jobs were created. And these are just a few simple examples of how being on the right side of disruptive technologies tends to be where you want to be. AI and machine learning, similar case. So I thought I'd play a short clip which represents one organization's view of an AI-first, AI-driven workplace. And the way I summarize some of the themes in this video is that it's what you can expect when intelligence is ambient in the workplace. So your place of work will know you intimately like your colleagues know you intimately. It will understand where you need to work today, which conference room you need to book, how many people are attending your meetings. When you travel, do you need a hotel? When you're in a remote office, do you need access to the Wi-Fi network? All the things that generate friction between employees and work, those are going to go away thanks to ambient intelligence. And I'll go ahead and just play a short clip. This is actually from a company called Jones Lang LaSalle. It's a property manager. And go ahead and give you a few seconds worth of that.
Start your day?
Give me 10 minutes.
Okay. How would you like to get there?
I'll walk.
Do you want to ride?
No, I'm good.
Thank you. Careful, Amy. Obstacle ahead. Nearly there. Good time, Amy.
Good morning, Amy. Welcome to JLL. You have one message from William Douglas.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Your first meeting is at 10:30. Please proceed to the elevators. Have a good day.
And you.
Lisa is in today. Lunch?
Good for me.
Invite sent. Have you seen the latest report?
No.
Your coffee will be ready in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thank you.
Okay. It's actually an interesting video. I'm happy to share the full link. The key points that I think that JLL video makes are that future, which seems like science fiction based on some of those use cases, is much closer than you might think. In fact, if you unpack a lot of the core technologies behind some of what you saw in the video, really you're looking at a work environment that requires massive amounts of bandwidth, some flexible screens. That was some interesting technology. You saw digital currencies, which already are, quite gaining popularity. But otherwise, a lot of those things that seem so futuristic really aren't that futuristic at all. Certainly not from the perspective of using AI-based technologies to understand employee behavior and predict the future needs of employees before they have to call the help desk or submit a trouble ticket or something like that. So when I talk about the future of work being a workplace that's intelligent, where the intelligence is ambient, it's just infused into the superstructure of the environment, you can picture a lot of these things entering the workplace in the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years. We're not talking about things that are 30 plus, 50 years off. So that's what we have to look forward to. And as you might imagine, to introduce a lot of these innovations into the workplace requires a ton of really smart people who are passionate about this kind of vision in the future. And you can already start to imagine how many jobs that world will create. That's really what we're here to talk about, is all of the opportunities that world is going to create for you. And if you're the ones that are agitating for change and inspiring colleagues and creating these new technologies, you've just seen the future, right? That's the way to future-proof your career. So in its most basic sense, we can distill artificial intelligence down into a few simple principles, and none is more simple than this formula. For those of you who have studied a little bit of math or stats, that is Thomas Bayes from the 18th century. He came up with a very elegant, a very simple formula to say the probability of A given B is really just the probability of A and B divided by the probability of B. It's basically just the application of that really led to early, what we used to call recommender systems, which is now what we call artificial intelligence. In fact, the first company I started in 1998, we called what we now call AI a self-learning personalization engine. But a lot of the foundational elements of AI actually come down to this basic statistical equation that describes the probability of events in the future occurring based on information that we have about related past events and being able to predict the probability of a new event that we don't know about occurring in the future. So when we talk about the kind of core components that underlie AI, we talk about obviously data and pipelines that continuously ingest data. We talk about models, basically take a snapshot of historical data. This is in the case of supervised machine learning. Unsupervised is a little bit of a different conversation. But we can then use those models to perform tasks using those models, essentially take a case like detecting cancer in MRI images. Based on everything, all the MRI images that we've trained a model on in the past, which have cancer, which don't, we can then look at a new image that the model has never seen and predict whether that image is cancerous or not. Then obviously we take feedback, which is typically by humans labeling the data once the machine learning model has made a prediction or a recommendation, and we feed that into that continuous learning cycle so that as new data enters, we retrain models and the AI gets more accurate over time. But a very simple set of principles founded on top of a very simple mathematical equation. So there are 4 kinds of tasks at which AI performs quite effectively. Sorry about that. And I thought I'd quickly go through them. Again, just trying to give you a very pragmatic way to think about some concepts that can become pretty abstract and pretty complicated pretty quickly. But when you think about what AI is good at doing, one key set of tasks are classification related. So using AI, we can pick, let's say, which call center agent should take the next call, which airplanes need service and what kind of service, who should be working a given shift. AI can be used to predict certain items. What's the likelihood that prisoners that are released will return to prison, will do the same crime again? Where's the next pandemic likely to occur? That can be done using things like satellite images. All of the kind of elements of the cycle that I described on the previous slide can be used for all of these tasks. How can we help customer service agents fix your problem faster, whether it's your cable company, your credit card company, your airline? Conversation tasks, this is where we talk about NLP, natural language processing. Things like chatbots can be used to diagnose mental health issues, help employees get HR issues like tax questions answered, help customers troubleshoot cable outages, machine vision tasks. These are things that are quite common. If you use Facebook or social media tools, oftentimes there'll be AI-based algorithms that are used to detect who's in your pictures, using deep neural nets. So these are all things that are pretty common. Amazon will oftentimes use things like this to make personalization recommendations. We can use an interesting set of data, crime statistics, and where there are windows broken and things like that to detect where crime waves will occur. And these are all technologies that are being used today for these use cases. This is not, kind of Star Wars or Star Trek kinds of technologies. These are things that companies are productizing and taking to market today. All good examples of technologies you may want to consider working around. Now, I'm going to make this very pragmatic and talk about ways to take some of this learning and some of these patterns, some of these things that are, like I said earlier, really cataclysmic in nature, and use them to your advantage. So this is a favorite quote of mine. What can be predicted is better left to machines, but what requires judgment or empathy is and always will be better left to humans. The name of my company, People Reign, is no coincidence. I feel very strongly that while technology is amazing and we can solve a lot of problems with technology, people do and always will reign. And I think it's really important when we have these conversations to realize that the algorithms are developed by people and the data is generated by people and the models are managed by people and the tasks that we use to predict or classify or do some of those other things are managed by people. And so when we talk about, the risk of AI going rogue, we as humans are responsible for making sure that AI is used responsibly. And that's one of the things where AI is going to be a net creator of jobs, because in order to make sure that AI is practiced responsibly, and we think about the ethics of AI, and we think about, what it means to detect where there's bias in data, that requires a lot of humans to regulate and understand how this is working. But at no point is it reasonable to think that, we're on the cusp of a bot apocalypse because some of these technologies can perform tasks that previously were performed by humans. It couldn't be anything further from the truth. So when we think about good candidates for tasks that may replace existing jobs, like we learned in the PricewaterhouseCoopers numbers, it's actually, I think it was from the World Education Forum, World Economic Forum, 85 million jobs are likely to be displaced in the next 5 years. And that's primarily for tasks that are either dull, dirty, or dangerous. That's what we usually talk about as being good candidates for AI-driven automation or for robotics. And when you think about, what careers fit those kinds of profiles, well, stockbrokers, already they've undergone a lot of disruption. It's a little bit hard to justify paying a stockbroker to make decisions with a lot less data than AI can use to make much more accurate decisions. Real estate agents, there's been huge disruption in that field. It's really been disintermediated, not just from the likes of Zillow and Redfin, but all across the whole stack, processing legal documents, going through the escrow process, oil rig maintenance. There aren't many jobs that are more dangerous. And so that's a great candidate for using robots to do those jobs in a safer way that's fully automated. Harvesting produce, backbreaking work. It's likely that we'll see machines that are operated by humans, but where humans aren't needed in the field, they're needed elsewhere to do work that uniquely requires humans. It should lead to higher produce yields and much more knowledge work for people who might, have their physical, bodies endangered by doing some of that work today. Mine detonation, don't need to really have too detailed a discussion to realize that that's something that is quite dangerous. And today we have machines driven by software that are used to much more accurately detect and detonate mines, so we don't have to put humans in the in fields that are very dangerous like that. So those are examples of, we talk about being on the right side of innovation. There's a massive amount of human ingenuity that needs to go into automating some of these tasks, and that's going to be a net creator of jobs, even though some of these professions will certainly not be ones where we're going to want to be investing in getting humans trained to do. So I thought I'd pick a few different examples and talk through specific skills that are innate to humans and the human experience. And as a way of thinking through, what you should be learning today in school to future-proof your career, we'll start from the left. So skills that will always be in need, that will really never be candidates for AI-driven automation. Humans need to exercise good judgment. When we talk about things like the ethics of AI, and let's say just in the field of defense, where we use, let's say, drones to determine when to drop a bomb, or when to rescue versus harm people in the battlefield. That requires a real nuanced sense of ethics, and that will never go away. And that's something that we'll never ever want to trust to machines. Empathy, creativity, mentorship, similarly. These are not skills that we can outsource to artificial intelligence. These are very fundamental to the human experience. And so, if you're thinking about what class to take next, and you're, debating, that philosophy course or the liberal arts course, art history, English, these things that you may not think about as careers that directly lend themselves to the future of work, that's where you're going to cultivate a lot of the key skills that you're going to need to work with technology. So obviously the technology skills are going to be important. They always will. We're looking for an increasingly tech-driven workplace, but it's really these soft skills, including leadership and having compassion, that are really going to differentiate the leaders from everyone else in the workplace of the future. So a few sample careers, I'll go through a couple case studies in a bit, but sample careers where whole new fields are going to be created that create, kind of like I was describing with the web, There was a time not too long ago, less than 30 years ago, where the web didn't exist. And we couldn't even fathom, the millions upon millions of jobs that the web has created, couldn't even fathom it, literally in, the late 90s. And in the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to have a massive need for conversational AI trainers and for teams to label data. You might have heard of an Amazon service called Mechanical Turk. So that some of this stuff is already available and it's already creating jobs for millions of people. AI ethics, creating the frameworks and then regulating how AI is delivered ethically, maintaining all of the new robots that are going to be out there, increasingly collaborating with humans, supervising machines. So the machines themselves will be run by software, but tuning them is certainly going to be a human pursuit. Governance around automation. So we're going to need to figure out, kind of like today, restaurants are regulated to make sure you don't get salmonella when you go into McDonald's. Well, in the future, we're going to have a similar set of protocols and guidelines to regulate how and where AI can be used. And lastly, data privacy. So as more and more data is used and collected based on us as consumers that we've provided to various services, it's going to be very important that we think about the legal frameworks and the privacy frameworks and the security policies that are going to be used to regulate how and where that data can be used, so that, through frameworks like in Europe, there's GDPR that regulates how data can be used. And in California, we have CCPA. So that's going to create a ton of new jobs, figuring out how those similar frameworks can apply to AI-driven automation. A set of fields that will see a lot of disruption, both in terms of job elimination as well as job creation, that kind of map to these two columns on the left: the legal field, the judicial field, the healthcare field, obviously education, insurance, public safety, manufacturing. They all have the attributes of the new career types in the middle column that will take advantage of the skills on the left column. So all good places to be investing in your careers, because these are all going to be fields that will be heavily impacted by the incursion of some of these new technologies. So I mentioned I'd share a couple examples. So let's talk through first one. What does it mean to be an AI conversation designer? This is something that at PeopleRain is an important category of new hire for us. Lots of not just software companies like PeopleRain, but lots of large enterprises are thinking about how to automate various services using AI and various NLP, natural language processing related technologies. And a lot of those require conversation designers, not to develop the chatbot per se, but to think about the personality and how conversations flow, and asking key questions like, what's the problem that we think this chatbot will solve? And thinking about the implications of, what might go wrong, and how can I anticipate, how can I build that awareness into the chatbot to make sure it does no harm? What should it say, and when should it say, and what tone should it speak in? Should it have a personality? How is it going to know what it doesn't know? These are whole careers that are going to be created based on these concepts of designing appropriate conversation flows. So if these kinds of things get you excited, now you have an opportunity to be on the front end of this massive wave of innovation that's going to create a ton of new jobs in roles like this, managing AI-based conversations. So a second new career option that I thought I'd introduce to you is being able to help, whether it's consumers or businesses, set up their voice assistants. So I'm a firm believer that AI is the new UI and voice is the new app. So increasingly, you're going to interact with all of the apps that you use on a daily basis through voice, and that's going to create a ton of disruption. And particularly, all of us that have grown up around text-based apps are going to reinvent what it means to be an expert using an app, and all of the apps that are going to be introduced are going to be voice first. So you can imagine how that disruption is going to create a need for a lot of people to train. Again, whether it's consumers, maybe it's the elderly. There's a lot of healthcare devices that are going to be used by the elderly who may not be as manually dexterous, but they'll need to interact with, whether it's their doctors or blood pressure monitors, et cetera, checking their vitals via voice-driven applications. And it's going to create a lot of jobs, being able to, go into, let's say homes and set these up, or train people about how to make best use of them. Because you could imagine a world in which, the elderly, just as an example, or even in, defense and the military, they're highly dependent on these voice-driven applications. We need to make sure that, because they could potentially impact, lives, that there's a very clear understanding of how to use them in a way that's optimal. So those are two examples, whether it's installation, training, configuration, but just these voice-driven technologies are going to create massive numbers of new opportunities, and consider that a leadership opportunity for you as you map out your career. So I get a little passionate about this stuff, and I thought if you are too, and if you're thinking about where you might take this conversation next, I thought I'd bring along a few actionable tips, starting with a few resources that I think are great. These are fairly accessible, augmenting your career. There's actually a gentleman, David Schreier. He's fascinating. He started a company called Esme Learning, and he's written several books. He was actually on my podcast a few weeks ago. It's going to be published in a few weeks. But he's a futurist and an author, and he wrote this book called Augmenting Your Career that talks a lot about these themes. If you're not familiar with Kai-Fu Lee's work, he's a venture capitalist and really one of the foremost thinkers on the future of AI, but specifically with regard to what it means for the superpowers in China and the United States. Life 3.0 is an interesting read. Max Tegmark is a professor at MIT, and this is actually a fictional work. It's kind of a dystopian look at the world of the future, but a good way to kind of process some of these thoughts. I'd encourage you, take a look at all of these. They're all available as audiobooks. They're all fairly accessible. Just 3 suggestions for ways to start to get deeper into some of these concepts that I introduced today. Another one of my favorite quotes that I wanted to close on: the pace of innovation has never been faster than it was yesterday, and it will never be slower than it is today. And I think that's going to continue to ring true, not just today, but into the future. And as I think about the opportunity that you have in front of you, I get not just really passionate, but really excited, because like I said at the opening, work will change more in the next 30 years than it has in the previous 300. And that's going to create a ton of opportunity for the next generation of leaders to really think about how to dispel a lot of those dangerous myths about the bot apocalypse and, AI, rising up against us, and Terminator and Skynet. It's just not true. It's just not true. And the more of us, and the sooner we, embrace, a more positive outlook on how AI will benefit humanity and be a net creator of jobs and change lives for the better, the more we benefit not just ourselves, but the more we benefit the global population. I'm very convinced that in emerging economies, we're going to see the benefits of AI deliver even greater progress. When you look at whether it's sub-Saharan Africa or parts of the Middle East, where there's a lot of poverty and famine, and we talk about droughts, I'm really convinced that the ways a lot of these technologies will be applied will be to eradicate a lot of these real these issues that impact millions and millions of lives. And so if we think bigger about the future of not just work, but the future of technology, what we can do with these innovative AI-based technologies, we go back to that, foundational slide, Bayes' theorem, and we go back to the set of tasks that AI can perform. And then we have the opportunity, to start to look above the tree line at what we, as humans with, ambitions and access to amazing technology here in the cradle of Silicon Valley, as we think about what's ahead for us, really think about taking responsibility for improving the world and using some of these technologies, because everybody else in the rest of the world is looking to us for leadership. And so to me, never been a better time to be human and to be a human collaborating with amazing technologies. So with that said, I encourage you, if you like these topics, certainly go and listen to the podcast. Cassie mentioned at the top, I've recorded over 100 episodes of AI and the future of work. So it is such a pleasure of mine to be able to sit down with world experts every week. I sometimes just pinch myself that these amazing people want to come hang out with me. But I always feel like I get the better end of the bargain. And thankfully, we've been able to record a lot of these conversations and they're all online. So go listen to the podcast. That's my contact information. That's my personal cell phone. If you're interested in pursuing careers, we're always hiring great people at PeopleRain. I would love to talk to you. But more broadly, if you're interested in other careers related to some of these topics, and there's anything I can do to help get you started, or help you orient your curricula, or help you kind of fine tune your passion, I'd love to have conversations with you offline. Please take me up on the offer. And with that said, I wanted to leave a few minutes for any questions that you have. And again, thank Maxim and Cassie and the organizers for having me, giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you for stopping by to speak with us. I know that we're probably all pinching ourselves too, that you would come in and share your insight, especially considering, you've spoken to so many people. And I mean, you have like this really broad understanding of kind of where things are going for the future and the future of work. So I will kind of keep quiet for anybody who may be thinking of a question.